Hello and welcome back. We're talking today about the integration phase of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. Hopefully you've seen my previous video on the preparation phase and understand at this point that psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy takes place in three phases. Preparation phase, the actual medicine session or psychedelic therapy session, and integration phase. So what is the integration phase? The first thing that I would like to debunk is an idea that I see held by some providers that integration is the same thing as regulation. So when someone has experienced a psychedelic psychotherapy experience or a psychedelic experience, they've been in an altered state. Oftentimes I see various types of modalities or therapies offered after the journey in order to help the person regulate their nervous system, arrive safely back in ordinary reality, feel grounded and oriented, and so on. And I sometimes see that referred to as integration. I would call that regulation. And though that is something you absolutely have to do, that is one of your responsibilities as a therapist working with the client, is to help them sort of transition safely from the altered state back into the sober, ordinary reality state. That is not what integration is. That's regulating, grounding, and that is, in my opinion, part of the experience of the medicine session itself. So the day that someone has a medicine session, immediately following that session, you need to make sure that you are helping them with that, with arriving back, and feeling okay, and in their bodies and in their mind and their emotions in that moment. Sometimes that could be something that carries over into the following day, but that is your responsibility of caretaking your client as the therapist there. That is not integration. Integration is a period of time following the medicine session where you are doing therapy sessions with your client using the content of the psychedelic experience and integrating that into their life in a permanent way. So integration means that you are taking some of the content from their psychedelic journey, whether that be a shift in perspective, an insight, a change in their self-perception, and you are implementing changes through your therapy with the client that result in some sort of behavior change, or change in the client's reactivity, or change in the way the client shows up, that affects their life for the better. So if you do integration well, you should be able to follow up with your clients 6 months or a year later, and they should be able to tell you that their life is better because they have been through this process with you. Maybe their self-image has changed. Maybe their ability to ask or demand things that they need has changed. Maybe their ability to access compassion in other relationships has changed. Maybe their ability to tolerate risk or tolerate discomfort has changed, and so they've stepped out into life in a different way. So your job in the integration phase is to say to the client, okay, what showed up when we were doing the medicine session together? What are some of the things we tracked? Some of the realizations or shifts or different perspectives that you accessed? Let's track those together. And now, what does that mean for where you're at now? How do we take those experiences to reflect on your life now? Where are you getting stuck, or where are you struggling? What happened in that medicine session that is relevant for how you're struggling? And what sorts of behavior change or a change in stance do you or can you step into in a real lived way so that something about your life actually will get better? So integration is integrating the psychedelic experience into the person's life, weaving it in a real way going forward so that they will permanently have a shift in that area that they're struggling with. That is the goal. How long does that take? Well, I said this already in my video on the preparation stage. It takes as long as it takes. So if you are working in a clinical context where you are sort of allowed or allotted a certain number of integration sessions, you and your client are a bit handicapped here. Ideally, this is done in a clinical setting, whether it's a group or private practice setting, that allows ongoing integration therapy sessions with your client as long as is needed. Because a lot of times this content is very challenging. Like, think about dealing with clients with trauma, for example, right? And a lot of material that comes up in the medicine session needs to get worked through, and you need to hold the client safely through that entire process. So integration ideally has kind of a long tail. And often what I find when this is done in a good way is that you and the client sort of self-taper over time, like the intensity and the frequency drops down. If you have the capability to refer them back to their original referring therapist and you have enough of a collaborative relationship with that therapist, that can sometimes be partly done by the other therapist. But of course, this can really vary. The availability of this can really vary. So the teaching point about integration here is it is a process that involves real change. So it is an active therapy intervention. And if you do not follow that process adequately into completion, then you are not serving your client because you are leaving them without their knowledge or their new insight being integrated into their life. And then really, how much have you helped them? So what will happen in that case is the client may, come back a year or two later and say, well, that was all very interesting, but nothing really changed. And your goal in intervention is to create, integration. It actually really is to create change. So that's not different from any other form of psychotherapy, really. But it's worth emphasizing because it does take some time. And if you have done psychedelic work with someone, you need to be meeting with them afterwards for therapy follow-up visits as part of the integration phase. It's not the kind of thing where the person can essentially sort of be sent back out into their life without integration. Because whatever, insights or glimpses of change that they may have gotten in that experience, they won't be able to latch onto it and keep it unless you have helped them come up with a way to do that. So I think when I did my video in preparation that I emphasized the critical importance of that stage in making sure the medicine experiences are useful and healthy and safe. And now I want to emphasize the critical importance of this stage, the integration stage, in making sure that the medicine session actually has long-term permanent benefits for the client. Okay? The experience itself can be pretty impressive, but does that actually change how they show up in their relationships, how they show up in their life, how they deal with their own self-image, how they relate to their self as embodied and take care of their body, how they, it could be all, whatever it is that they're struggling with, does that change afterwards? So yes, I am suggesting that as part of your job as the therapist to help them create that change. And the medicine session is the touchstone to go back to that helps them get a glimpse of what may be possible and also helps them somewhere access resources in a different way. So each medicine session has a preparation phase and an integration phase. So if you're doing, say, 3 medicine sessions with a client, you start with preparation phase, as I've previously discussed. You do your first medicine session. Then you integrate that session. You spend as much time as you need doing integration on that session before you do the next medicine session. Then you integrate that one before you do the third one, right? And depending on how many you and your client have decided to do, you make sure that after their last or final medicine session, you stay with that client until that content has been fully integrated in a way that makes sense according to their presenting complaint or the symptom area that they're struggling with. So I hope that I've made the point today that you can't shorten that experience or artificially reduce the number of sessions that are offered for integration without potentially taking a huge part of the value of the whole treatment away. And I hope I've also made the point that regulation, feeling grounded, oriented, and regulated after a medicine session is not integration, it's regulation. And that integration is the therapy work done afterwards. So thank you, and I'll see you for the next video.